Game of the Year went to It Takes Two. Now, I only played about an hour or two of it with Dave. I enjoyed it. It was pretty cool. Not my Game of the Year, but hey, each to their own.
I thought it was an interesting choice. Like, when I was looking at it, I was for sure thinking they go like Deathloop or maybe
Deathloop did seem like the safe choice.
Or Psychonauts even. I just... It made me... The one thing I will say is that it did make me want to play It Takes Two now, because I hadn't really touched it much. But yeah, this... maybe EA just paid Jeff Keighley loads of money and was like, please make this...
Let's not get into that. Let's not...
I mean, I finished It Takes Two.
Did you now?
Yeah, I loved it.
Yeah?
And yeah, it's really good. I think it's... I don't know if it deserves Game of the Year, simply because I don't think I've played enough games this year to figure out whether or not it is. But it does some really good stuff with, like, mechanically. It obviously you've played about an hour of it. It feels like it should be about 4 hours long. It's not. It's about 18.
Yeah, that's the kind of one thing for me. Like, as I was playing it, I was like, I'm enjoying this, but I know how long this game is, and I don't want to play a game that's this long, you know?
So
does the story justify it being that long?
I think that the story is probably the worst part about it. I think that the mechanics of it are just constant, like brand new, like just throwing new ideas at you, new game, and like not necessarily even like completely fresh game ideas, though there are definitely some in there, but there is just like constant, okay, you've done a few levels of that, now here's a totally different set of mechanics, okay. And like, yeah, I thought it was, I played that on the couch with my partner, and we had a great time. It sparked some really interesting conversations about the characters. So I think the characters themselves are... I think the characters are interesting. I think the characters are okay written. The two main characters, I should say. Because once again, please, games industry, take writing young people out of the hands of white middle-aged men. For goodness sake. Like, it's awful.
Agreed.
Like they cannot write young folks for toffee. That being said, visually, I think it looks fine. And as I say, I think mechanically, it tries a lot of really cool stuff. It's got some really fun boss fights in it. The writing, the storytelling, I can't work out if they are some of the best writers in the industry and really get it, or if they're some of the worst and don't. Like. So, have you played A Way Out?
I only briefly dabbled with it. Like, I have a couple of these games a year where I'm like, I know I need to play them, and I play the first 15-30 minutes of them, and then I never go back to it.
So I think with Way Out, you can play that for about 15-20 minutes, and if you're like, then I think you're fine. Like,
okay.
But the writing in A Way Out is either very knowing, brilliant writing, or garbage. Like it like I cannot work out what the intention is in the writing of it. Like it's got brilliant moments of absolute cheese, and then moments where you're like, are you playing this for laughs? I actually don't know. And I think it's the same.
I have the same feeling when I listen to a Limp Bizkit album.
Yeah.
That's your obligatory Limp Bizkit reference as well. Surprised it took this long.
Is this clever? I don't know. And I think it's the same with It Takes Two. Like, I think there's wonderful world building, some two very interesting characters that are really interesting to go and think about and do if you're playing it with somebody. It will force you to have discussions about them, which I think is really interesting. But the writing is all over the shop. It feels like a very chintzy 1980s Honey, I Shrunk the Kids kind of movie.
Yeah, I definitely got that vibe from it.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I've been feeling about watching Hawkeye, by the way. That's an interesting sidebar.
Right, like that kind of romp, but also Home Alone, that kind of stuff, right? Like that kind of writing where it's like comedy action kind of stuff, right? But then every once in a while it will try and be serious, and then it doesn't earn it. It never quite feels like they earn the payoff of the serious bit, right? So it's not like Uncharted, where the writing in that is funny, really characterful, lovely. You feel really great and close to the characters in terms of, it being essentially an action movie. And then every once in a while there'll be a moment where you're like, I really hope they don't kill this character off because I really like them. Or that was very powerful storytelling, and they clearly lean into that for stuff like Last of Us. But with this, it's like, hey, you just ripped in half a childhood toy in a very graphic, disgusting way that is very, very entertaining, very, very funny, and kind of like really bleak black humor kind of stuff. And then they're like, but this is actually an interesting story about how our relationship affects a child. And it's like, no. No, this is not. We're not here for this. And also, you can't carry it off. Like, so I can't tell. I cannot tell if it's like brilliant, or like if they're brilliant, or maybe like some of their team is brilliant, and then some of it is kind of farmed out to other.
Is it like this thing where it's like, hey, look, we did a metaphor. Look how clever we are. Look how clever this metaphor is.
Yeah. It's like it's the kind of level of writing in Dear Esther where you're like, I get it. It's the moments like if I had to relate it to a different game, actually, it'd be another EA game, and that's Mass Effect Andromeda. In that some of the writing in Mass Effect Andromeda is absolutely banging, and some of it is the most like, please read my Tumblr kind of just self-aggrandizing angsty nonsense. Like, some of it is really amazing world building and some very cool character development and some challenging some very difficult ideas, and then some of it is, dear diary, I'm sad. Like, and it's just it's all over the as I say, it's all over the shop.
The only way that works is if you siphon the characters out with those different bits. So if you have a couple of characters who are the serious characters, who are the characters that you like actually have human, emotions and depth of feeling, and then you have other characters who are the Dear Diary, like, JD from Scrubs style bloggers out loud. Like, it works when you've got it, but if you've got the same characters, like, neck breaking back and forth with different tones, that's when it feels like a real mess, right?
Yeah, it does, and it's very difficult to take. There's some good characterization, some really good animation that kind of gets you part of the way there to the emotions, and the voice actors do a very, very good job. But there's just the odd line here or there that just clunks, and I think as soon as you have that clunk, it takes you out of it.
Sure.
Yeah. I'm a really big believer in there being like a real flow to storytelling in games, whereby if you break the illusion of the kind of story that you're trying to tell, it's just far too easy for the person to be like, oh, okay, well, this is just a game again, and it takes a long time to build that back up, and there's just so many little clunkers here and there where you're like, I don't care about this story.
And in fairness, video games is, in my opinion, the hardest form of media to try and tell stories because of that absolute, like, that issue. Apart, whether it's the voice acting or the actual, like, dialogue, all of that you have to combine with the fact that, well, there's the actual pacing of the game as well, and there are parts where you're trying to tell a story, but then there are parts where there's gameplay, and there can be too much of one, there could be too much of the other. Like, it's been my biggest issue with the Yakuza series, and like, I'm playing Lost Judgment at the moment and I'm enjoying it, but I still have this problem where there's like 10 minutes where the controller's on the table because it's just dialogue, and it's like, I'm kind of enjoying it.
Yeah, but that's because that's where, and again, you're absolutely right. Most games do this, where they go, right, here's the gameplay, and here's the story, right? And we've had we've had games that are able to do both of those at the same time for years. They're called role-playing games, right? Like where you're using mechanics to understand, like, oh, I rolled badly. Immediately, your brain is like, I fumbled and I tripped over the stairs to go and do. The kind of storytelling I think works really well in gameplay is, and again, to go back to Uncharted, because, and again, the barrier's pretty low when it comes to, can you tell an action story well, right? Like, yeah. But there's this really brilliant moment in in one of them. It's very, very simple, where Nathan is like, he's been absolutely battered, and there's a big set of stairs in front of him. He's really, really exhausted, and you need to move him up the stairs, so you move him up the stairs. But the storytelling bit is that he's moving a little bit slower in his animations, a little bit heavier in his animations. This bright and lively and athletic man, and he holds his hand out and basically uses the banister. It's one of the few times that you'll see him actually do it in that game. I think it's number 2. And he's like so tired that he reaches his hand out to the banister to move himself up the stairs, whereas normally you just leap up them. That is amazing. An amazing blur of like storytelling and gameplay, right? Where they're both happening at the same time, because the storytelling is Nathan is tired, right? Like, that's really simple storytelling. But rather than somebody come up to you and go, Nathan, you look tired, what happens is you see that physically while you're playing, while you're actually doing the part of the game that is navigation. Right, and I think that
show don't tell. It's like one of the rules of like good movie making, isn't it? Show don't tell, really.
Right.
If you've got a visual medium, and it's specifically a visual interactive medium, like imagine what a director would feel like, a good movie director, if not only could they show you rather than tell you something, but they could have you physically interact with the character just to feel how it feels for them.
Right.
And it's something that when you were speaking, I was just thinking, Peter, like, this just isn't enough in video games, this sort of like creative decision. Like, it really isn't.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's because people want to detach and just enjoy a game and play it for like the silliness of the mechanic or whatever, and
I think actually it's because I think it's basically because storytelling is still seen as kind of a bit of an afterthought.
Secondary. Yeah,
and like, I can understand why. Like, mechanically, it's very, very difficult to understand that stuff. You need specifically a narrative director, but you need that narrative director. So typically what you have in big studios is you'll have, the way that a lot of them work is that lots of the different teams won't really speak to each other all that much, and not because, they don't, not because they don't want to, but just because, like, they've got to get on and do their thing, right? Sure. You look after the gameplay design, you look after the code, you look after the narrative design. And when you work in that fashion, like, it's very unlikely that you're going to merge narrative and gameplay design at the same point, right? Because the gameplay person is like, cool, at this point you do the shooting, and this point you do and the narrative person is like, oh, this is the troubling middle chapter or like, this is the rising action. And it's just like, yeah, but that stuff isn't connecting with one another. So what you end up with is action sequence, cinematic sequence, action sequence, cinematic sequence. And it's weak, right? Like, it's just and unengaging. And I think that if you are going to do that, then those cinematic moments, the bits where your characters open the damn mouths, had better be brilliant.
It's also become increasingly a problem with this whole idea of like branching paths and optional dialogue text as well, where half the time, like, they'll give you 3 options, but it's actually completely inconsequential about which option you choose. Yeah. It's like, why are you wasting my time with this? Yeah. There was a speech or a conference a couple of years ago by John Ingold, who kind of like spoke about this kind of specific thing, and he was using like Assassin's Creed as a
I saw that. It was great,
and it's amazing. Like, anyone that should go and watch it just to kind of understand like how difficult it is to do this. Like, I wouldn't want to do it, but there's also like there's just these small things you can do to just take a game from here to the next level, and a lot of the time they don't do it.